Yes, a wonderful good morning to you, Grenada, Carriacou, Petite Martinique, the rest of the Eastern Caribbean. It is Thursday, it is Wednesday, the 24th day of the month of November. Welcome to The Point for this wonderful, really wonderful Wednesday morning. I'm Joseph Cadore, and I'm saying thanks for being part of the broadcast. Good morning also to those of you that's joining us via television. That's via GBN's Channel 7, Channel 11, Channel 20 if you're in cable. If you're following us via the World Wide Web at www.gbn.gd, or you chime in via the Facebook page or the YouTube channel. My guest this morning, as announced, is this Minister with responsibility for climate change, Senator Simon Stiell. Senator Stiell, good morning and welcome to the program. How are you?
Good morning, Joseph. I'm very well, and good morning to your viewing and listening audience.
It's good to have you. It's been quite a while, you and I, we've had this engagement. It doesn't seem like quite a long time ago. It has been a while.
It has been a while. I've missed you.
All is well?
All is well. We can make up for it now. It's a very intense period. Just returning from Glasgow, which was basically 2.5 weeks of really, really intense discussion. So I'm still in recovery mode, catching up on things here back at home.
Well, I promise not to be too hard on you on any climate change issues. Glasgow the last two weeks, but from all indications, has been quite interesting, really, really interesting. And there was a lot of overtime, back channel lobbying to come to an agreement. At the center of all of this, Senator, is the conversation of getting the temperature, the 1.5 degrees. It is the number that is foremost of you at everybody's mind. But just contextualize for me, just give me a summary as to what was some of the resolutions or pertinent issues that came out of the meetings of world leaders.
Okay, well, coming back to that magic number of 1.5, the science tells us that if global temperature rise increases above 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, what we will see is irreversible climate change. So we're already seeing where we are right now at 1.1 degrees. We're seeing increases in the frequency and intensity of hurricanes, sea level rise, floods, droughts, other parts of the world, wildfires, loss of biodiversity, health-related issues, heat domes. We're already seeing extreme conditions. But where the world is actually heading right now is actually 2.7 degrees, which will effectively be hell on earth, not just for climate vulnerable states such as ours, but for the entire world. So the science tells us we need to stick below 1.5. The science also tells us we're not on track for that. And then the key purpose and the key outcome of the meeting in Glasgow was to see how we can keep 1.5 alive, how we can keep that target within reach. So what are the measures that need to be taken globally, led by the major emitters, but all countries have a role to play, but to contain temperature rise to that magic number of 1.5. So we went into Glasgow with a significant gap. We left with a significant gap, but some of the outcomes that were agreed to ensures that those are within reach. And to answer your question specifically, one is what they call the closing of the Paris Rulebook. So Glasgow was the most significant climate meeting. So every year there is a meeting, they call it the Conference of the Parties. We missed it last year because of the pandemic. But this is basically the 5th year anniversary, it's actually 6 years, of the Paris Agreement. And the purpose was to put into action to operationalize all of what was agreed back in 2015 in Paris, but to actually agree on technically how that will be done, the responsibilities of parties. And the starting point was the closing of the rule book, which are the rules that countries have to abide to. What are the prescriptions? What are the reporting mechanisms? What are the some of the actions that need to be taken to ensure that the world is working toward that 1.5 degrees a milestone. But there were other outputs. So at a macro level, the Glasgow Climate Compact, which is what that agreement was called, is the first international agreement that speaks to the phasing down of coal. Coal is it is the most significant greenhouse gas producer. So commitment to, which is set in the path to the end of coal production and coal consumption, was a historic announcement. In addition to that, fossil fuel subsidies. Trillions of dollars over the years have been pumped into the fossil fuel industry, subsidizing it. And agreement was made to start to reduce. The wording was a little looser than we would like, but inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. I'm not sure which fossil fuel subsidies are actually efficient, but recognizing that that is exacerbating the situation. And then that leads to the potential redirection of some of those fossil fuel subsidies to other areas, such as renewable energy, that has a positive outcome. There were a number of other significant outcomes. One that directly impacts us positively as a climate vulnerable state is the doubling of adaptation finance for developing countries. So this moves it from currently about 20 billion a year is spent globally for developing countries for adaptation, and that has been increased, or the commitment to increase that to 40 billion. So there will be a direct and indirect benefit of that here at home as those climate finance flows start to increase. One of the challenges that we face is that of those global climate flows, only 2% actually go to small island developing states, the most vulnerable and the most needy. So addressing that still needs to be done. There's some other areas I can go into those, if you like. But in terms of the general outcomes, there was still significant global disappointment as to where we are. The bar that's been set is extraordinarily low. But I think in terms of the positive outcomes, I think it was the best possible deal that could have happened at this time. Just a couple of other things, and the recognition of the science, the recognition of that 1.5 target. The actual Paris Agreement speaks to well below 2.0 degrees, but we know that 1.5 is that magic number. There are major emitters. There are some countries out there that want to work closer to that 2-degree level, ignore what the science is telling us. But there was universal consensus that 1.5 is the target. Science has to be adhered to, and there needs to be an increase in ambition and increase in action, climate action, if we are to protect the planet.
Particular concern, Minister, is the conversation that surrounds the argument between the emitters and those who are directly affected, small island states like ours. And at the start of the summit, there was particular disappointment as it relates to the seeming lack of and want to be able to word it quite carefully. But that byplay you saw between the U.S. and China, Chinese premier not being there, then sending, of course, there was a letter that was read on his behalf. Certainly does brings a lot to the table as to whether or not this is not just another talk shop event, Senator.
Okay, well, being part of the process and seeing this thing up close, it is more than a talk show. It's to infamous activist Greta Thunberg, who in the lead up to the COP said it's just blah, blah, blah. And I can understand why, persons feel that way, because there is a lot of talk. There is a lot of tension by the parties involved. There are close to 200 countries represented at this annual event. And unfortunately, agreements tend to boil down to the lowest common denominator. Decisions are made by consensus. All parties have to agree. So it is an almost impossible task to squeeze out higher levels of ambition than are currently achieved because of the diverse positions that are in the room. You have the global north, where you have all of the major emitters. Within the G20, the 20 richest countries in the world, they generate somewhere in the region of 80% of global emissions, and they comprise 85% of global GDP, global wealth. So the problem lies there, the solutions lie there. But then within that mix, then the other 180 countries, small island vulnerable states, with something like 40 of those, 20% of the parties, we generate a fraction of emissions, and we are developing nations. So you have this spectrum of positions, and the contrast is stark. From a political point of view, it's very difficult with a small voice to make our voices heard. And the conflicts of interest, the vested interests that exist, whether it's political, whether it's economic, or otherwise, geopolitics has a major role to play in this. So coming back to what the outcome was, as low as that bar is set, working with the lowest common denominator, I believe, that the most positive or productive of outcomes was actually produced. But as I said, that bar is low. Somebody made an analogy. They said coming into that COP, we were in the basement and we left on the third floor of a 30-story building. So it's clear that we have a very, very long way to go. But progress was made. It is a platform that we continue working on, and Glasgow wasn't the be-all and end-all. It wasn't the destination. It's just part of the journey.
Okay.
And it's what is critical is that countries, the parties, continue to move in a direction that will achieve a positive outcome. And there are two critical timelines. One is 2030, and the science tells us that by 2030 we need to almost halve global emissions by that time, and then reach net zero by 2050 if we are going to keep that 1.5 alive. And the mechanisms to achieve that are in play, but as I said, there is still a massive gap, and we're still a long, long way to go.
Still a long, long way, and the reality of it is that for small islands, us here in this part of the region, there's not much we can do. There continues, Senator, to be the naysayers who say that climate change isn't real. It doesn't exist. It's a farce. It's a figment of whoever it is, the scientists and other politically oriented organizations, their imagination. But our reality Senator, is quite different on the ground in terms of what we experience, the changes that we have seen. And as such, it puts us in a position where it requires immediate action from us, doesn't it, locally?
Well, the two elements to the action that's required. One is what they call mitigation. So that is the measures that need to be taken to reduce emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, to ensure that we stick to that 1.5 target. So that's the first part. And in terms of the contributions that we can make a moral contribution. But in terms of our emissions, they are negligible compared to those large emitters. So there are things that we can do, we need to do, we are doing there. And whether that is transitioning to renewable energy, for example, whether it is more sustainable waste management, whether it is management of our ecosystem, there are things that we can do to make a contribution, and things that we have to do at home, and there are economic benefits, there are environmental benefits, there are social benefits for us. But in terms of this global target, there is limited impact that we can have. The second piece is adaptation, and this is a piece that is absolutely critical for us. We are already at 1.1 degrees. We are already seeing the direct impacts of climate change, whether that is sea level rise and the impact that that's having on our coastal communities, whether it's loss of biodiversity, loss of corals, whether it is increases in frequency and intensity of hurricanes, the floods, the droughts, etc. All of those things we're seeing. It's very, very real. So those climate deniers, they don't know what they're talking about. It doesn't. Their denials do not fit in with science, and they do not fit in with what we see on the ground, and not just here in the Caribbean, not just as vulnerable states, but around the world, Europe, North America, China, India, all around the world. There isn't a nation untouched from pole to pole, hemisphere to hemisphere. The impacts of climate change have been seen and felt. But for us, the need for us to adapt to these extreme conditions, which are only going to get more extreme. Even at 1.5, things are going to be far worse than they currently are. So even if we hit that target, which is a major challenge, global challenge, it isn't going to be plain sailing. And the need for us to build resilience, and whether that is water, for example, water scarcity. We're seeing lengthy periods, drought periods, water shortages. We're also seeing very intense, very short, heavy rainfall that causes problems with flooding and the damage that causes. But the need to be able to capture the rainfall we do receive, be able to store that, distribute that to areas, especially in the south of the island. And whether that is for our homes, whether that is for our tourism product, whether that is for agriculture, these are things that we need to be considering. Right. Our infrastructure, we're seeing issues, whether it is the St. John's River and the extreme flooding there, the impact that has on the River Road area, whether it's Molinaire. Extreme weather has had an impact in terms of the destabilization of that area. Other areas. So the need for us to be able to build resilience to these things, to protect. Hurricanes is a perfect piece. We cannot prevent hurricanes from happening, but what we can do is limit the damage caused during an event like that, and we can accelerate the rate of recovery post-event. So these are the things that we need to be investing in. These are the things that, with the right financial support, are within our control in order to build that resilience against those vulnerabilities.
There is the financial support that we depend on from the richer nations. You intimated that there's been a commitment to double the financing that's available to areas that are directly impacted by climate change. But certainly, while the world will do its due, on the local front, is what policies is there that government is driving to address those issues? We talked about the issue, its effect on agriculture, the direct effect on tourism. We've seen the effects on, let's say, we have longer drought periods. Certainly, there must be policies that guides what we do at home. What can you speak about directly that government is doing in terms of instituting those policies?
Okay, so within the climate world, there are two major guiding policies. One is what we call our NDCs, our nationally determined contributions, and the second are our national adaptation plans. And I'll come back to those. There are other policies we have, whether we have a climate change policy, we have whether it's an energy policy, water policies, land use policies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there are policies that speak to this. And then the overarching policy from a development point of view that joins up these dots is our National Sustainable Development Plan. So those are the guiding pieces. Now, specific to climate, the NDCs are critical. So every country in the world has to produce one of these. And this outlines the measures that need to be taken to make a national contribution toward that 1.5 degrees target. And Grenada submitted its second NDC at the end of last year. We were one of the first countries in the world to submit it. And it is these aggregated policies, NDCs, that tell us whether as an international community, a global community, we're on track or we're not on track. Now, in Grenada's case, 70% of our emissions come from transport and energy. The other pieces are waste and some from limited industrial processes. So the focus of our NDC is on renewables. It is on transport. The piece, we can come up with a brilliant plan, but it's how do we finance this? The estimated cost for Grenada to do what it needs to do to reduce its emissions by 40% by 2030 is 1.1 billion US dollars. The second, so the requirement for external financing for this and discussions, processes are in play to access at least some of the resources that are necessary for us to implement that. The second one is our national adaptation plan. So the first NDC is for mitigation, then the second is adaptation. And again, this identifies the critical areas that interventions are needed in order for us to adapt to the changing climate conditions. We are in the process of revising our first national adaptation plan. So in 2022, we will have an updated plan. And I would anticipate that the value of that will also run into the many, many hundreds of millions of dollars, if not touching that same $1 billion mark. So again, the issue of external financing comes into play. But these are the two international documents that financing agencies, funding agencies, development agencies look to in terms of releasing or the development of projects that can be put forward for international funding will be judged against.
Okay, so let's try to see if we can break it down a bit. So one of the NDCs speaks to that of our transportation. Break that down really and truly. We've in the more recent years we've seen an influx and really an increase. We're tripling the number of vehicles on the road. More vehicles, more emissions. Tell me how exactly. What is that plan exactly? How does it affect and impact that locally? What is the plan on the ground when broken down? How is it going to be executed?
Okay, so first of all, there will be a global end to the combustion engine. So diesel and gasoline engines, as we know it in the vehicles that we drive, the car manufacturing industry has moved towards phasing out of the combustion engine. So there is a finite lifespan for the continued use or the continued manufacturing and purchasing of new combustion engines. So its death nail has been struck. So, but that is longer term. Then for us, in terms of availability of electric vehicles, which are more expensive, there are considerations in terms of the infrastructure that's required to support them, electric charging stations, the technicians to maintain them. It is a revolution that is going to take place in the car industry. So the question then is, how does Grenada respond to that? So we're currently importing increasing numbers of used vehicles, which is a problem, which is one of the reasons why we have passed legislation that regulations that limit the age of vehicles that can be imported. Mm-hmm. The second, so that is a start. The very narrow end of that start. Where we need to move to is looking at the policies, looking at the incentive packages, looking at the infrastructure that needs to be invested in order to stimulate the introduction of electric vehicles. And that process has also started. Grenada is currently part of there are 3 or 4 islands within the OCS that are working together with the GCF and the Green Climate Fund, the largest climate financing organization out there, but looking at a program for the accelerated introduction of electric vehicles into our islands. So that is looking at the policies that need to be done. What is the infrastructure that's required? What are the financial frameworks that need to be put in place in order to encourage this? So how we then transition. Mm-hmm. How we then transition to electric vehicles, how we phase out the combustion engine vehicles, how we transition to electric vehicles is currently on the table.
And certainly you did hint to it. The possible potential, the economic impact it could have on the livelihoods of most Grenadians, given the fact that there's such a rigid timetable and already the economic challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis.
Yes. But when you have the car industry making decisions, manufacturers saying they will cease making the combustion engine by 2030, we can see an end in sight, and we then need to work back, factoring in the economic, environmental, and social implications of that.
So that's one of the policies as it relates to mitigation, as you keep your eyes on the cloud. Then there is adaptation. How exactly? What is the adaptation plan? If you could spell it out for me, quite as simply as you can.
Well, adaptation is required in all sectors. So whether it is infrastructure, so the Ministry of Implementation, in terms of smart infrastructure, whether that is our road systems, whether it's bridges, sea defenses, public buildings, how do we build in the necessary resilience to be able to withstand whether it's flooding, whether it's hurricanes, sea level rise, etc. And every project that goes through the PSIP process, public projects, is climate screened. So every piece of civil works that takes place in this country, the climate-related considerations are factored into the design and the costing of that. So we're future-proofing, climate-proofing public infrastructure that moves forward. And Grenada was one of the first countries in the region to mainstream climate change in its BSIP programs. So that's one piece. Whether we take water, for example, I mentioned that earlier. We have the G-Cruise project, again, the Green Climate Funded project, and the German government-funded project. This is a $125 million project, which is building resilience into our water sector. I mentioned earlier issues with water security through increased droughts, floods, etc. So some transformational interventions that are being made. Work has already started in terms of the implementation of that project, which will transform our water sector and is viewed again as a model for other developing states throughout the world.
But let me ask you, Senator, what specifically, though, we're looking at well beyond the issue of water, what specifically can you say to the Grenadian public? And I'm assuming all of this conversation comes in consultation with NOWASA. In what can we see on the ground? Can we look forward to, let's say, larger storage areas, increasing in facilities? Is that the sort of things that you can say that is being implemented and we can see on the ground, so that at least the average person can have an appreciation that, listen, something is being done? What can you tell us exactly?
So we start with storage. So increasing our ability to collect the rainfall we do receive. So it's collection and then storage of that rainfall. So we're maximizing the rainfall received. The second then is, how do we distribute that? How do we get that increased supply to those areas that most require them? So that requires upgrading of our distribution network, the lines, the pipes. It means burying many of those pipes. A lot of our pipes are surface mounted, highly vulnerable to damage through to hurricanes, landslides, etc. So burying those pipes. And as I said, getting them to the places that most require it. The most drought-prone areas are in the south, where it's most drought prone, and there is also greatest demand, both commercially and residentially. So how do we increase supply, again, to our tourism sector, to households? And then in our rural communities, our agricultural sectors, there are, it links to various irrigation projects, programs in agriculture, in terms of being able to get water to where it's most needed within the agricultural sector. And then there's the policies that are required. Water efficiency, how we can be more efficient in terms of our use of water, reducing wastage, whether that is in the collection, storage and distribution process, whether it's in our homes, in our businesses, how we can conserve what we have better, and the policies and the mechanisms that are required to do that. So it's very, very forward-leaning, forward-thinking. And as I said earlier, it's a model that is being now adopted by other countries throughout the world based on what we're doing here at home.
It's about 29 minutes on to the hour of 10 o'clock in the morning time. Break. It is to the point. My guest this morning, Senator Simon Stiell, the Minister with responsibility for climate change. We'll be right back. welcome back to the program. Welcome back, Senator Stiell. We have a caller that is on the line. Classic, good morning. Good morning, caller.
Good morning, my friend Joseph.
Yes, you live. Go ahead, please, sir.
Yes, sir. Mr. Stiell, it seems to me as if maybe they are talking more so about the people that rule this country, didn't know much about climate change. Because, as you are aware, climate change has been occurring because of maybe industrial development and the type of engines that have been supplying power and all other things to the world, even the motor cars too, the vehicles. Now, were you all aware of climate change when you all were buying this diesel engine to run or to give us electricity in the whole country? Do you think after a few years that this particular engine would become obsolete, seeing that we go into electricity? Do you think we have wasted our money, because in the next 10 years we might be hearing maybe all over the world would be involved in electrical motors?
Okay.
Explain that.
Thank you, sir. Senator?
Okay, it's a good question. In terms of the diesel engines that currently exist, that currently installed in Grenlec, most of them are close to the end of their natural lifespan. There was a requirement to purchase earlier on in the year a replacement diesel engine to replace one that had malfunctioned, reached the end of its lifespan. It was a replacement engine that had been specified. I believe commitments were made for the acquisition of the replacement diesel engine prior to government's reacquisition of the utility. So, based on the urgent need to ensure that there was sufficient capacity to supply the island, and the work and commitments that had previously been made with regard to this engine's replacement. A diesel engine is what has been purchased and installed. But in terms of all others, work is currently taking place with UN Environment, with the Rocky Mountain Institute, looking at our existing remaining diesel engines and what will be required to replace those over time based on their remaining lifespan to renewable energy. So work in terms of the transition to renewables has started, but it is not a straightforward exercise. There are technical considerations, there are cost considerations, but the modeling of that and the work to understand what is required, what needs to be done, both from a technical and a financial point of view, that work has started.
Okay, hold on. Thank you. Good morning, caller. You're live.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Cadore. Greetings.
Yes, go ahead,
greetings
sir.
to your guest. Now, I would like to guarantee that your guest can hear me. Can he hear me well? Can I have that confirmation?
Senator Stiell, if you can hear the caller, just could you please wave for him?
Can you hear me, sir? Mr. Stiell, sir? Oh, what a coincidence.
Senator, are you hearing the caller?
I am.
Yes, Mr. Stiell,
I'm
can you
here.
hear me? Can you hear me, Mr. Stiell? Well, it's rather unfortunate. Isn't it strange? Isn't it coincidental that they can't hear me at all when I want to talk? I'll call back,
Senator
Mr. Cadore. Let's see if you can rectify that. Can you hear me, Mr. Stiell?
Let the caller ask his question.
Let's go ahead.
You see, I would like to relate a list of things that occur in this country, has been for some time and continue to. One, The burning of foreign waste on the beaches of this country, one particularly, alongside the airport, contaminating the reefs and otherwise, helping in the acidification of the ocean. The flowing of raw sewage into our beaches, rivers and beaches and waterways. The indiscriminate cutting of trees, the burning of charcoal kilns, construction rubble and agricultural stubble. Mr. Stiell, and the list can go on. The destruction of our wetlands, the destruction of our mangrove swamps, all in the name of development, Mr. Stiell. Questions. Do you share the view that these activities assist, aid, contribute to the global warming phenomenon? Two, what has the people that you represent, the government, been doing over the years to combat, or should I say to mitigate this? And what do you have planned, really planned to combat it in the future? I hope you understood my question and don't want you to go off on any tangent. Answer my question. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Will you?
Thank you very much, sir. Senator?
Yeah, I heard the caller very clearly. There are chronic issues. So sewage is one, where we have a waistline that runs off Point Saline, where untreated sewage is pumped offshore. And this is the situation with many of us here in the Caribbean. The cost and the is required to install full sewage systems, treated sewage, is immense. And many of us, not just Grenada, are facing the same challenge in terms of how we address this. So does that have a negative impact on our environment? Absolutely. Is it a problem we recognize? Absolutely. Is there a need to do something about it? Absolutely. And in terms of what we are doing, there are a number of projects that are in play. One as part of the Climate Smart Cities program, which is a comprehensive program looking at both adaptation and mitigation interventions on islands. And sewage is one of those elements, and requirements for determining what is required is covered in that. But it comes with a price tag, many tens of millions of dollars. NAWASA, they're involved in that, but NAWASA independently are looking at other programs in terms of what is required. The issue is how we fit. NAWASA is working on the pieces that it does have control of and funding for, in terms of new sewage lines, in terms of putting some of that onshore infrastructure that's required to collect and channel sewage. So work is being done there, which is the first phase. The critical piece, and the piece that's outstanding, is how do we treat and dispose of that waste? So it is a problem, but it is one that is that's under serious consideration. But the financial resources that are required to implement it are not at our fingertips right now. Whether it is, I think you mentioned foreign waste on our beaches. There are issues on our beaches. There is the management of our own waste. So what waste comes into the island, what and how that waste is collected and treated. That is within our control, which is why we've banned the use of and importation of single-use plastics, styrofoam, etc., which is making a positive contribution. In terms of what is washed up on our beaches, then that is another issue in terms of tidal flows and issues with waste around our coastlines. What we do at Perseverance is absolutely critical. And we have a project which is coming to completion with solid waste, the integrated solid waste management program, which is looking at the closing of the existing dump site, which has been so problematic in terms of fires, in terms of untreated, unprocessed waste, unmanaged waste going into that dump. But the closing of that, which will be completed in February of next year, at the cost of many millions of dollars. The fire issue is being managed, and then the cap in and closure, decommissioning of that dump is close to completion. Then there is the opening of the new cell, which again will take place formally early next year, February of next year, where there will be separation of waste, metals, plastics, and organic waste. We're working with partners, looking at how we recycle those materials, so those materials do not end up in the dump site, are collected and shipped out of the country for recycling, and the use of the organic waste for compost, which could be used agriculturally and domestically. So work is taking place in terms of moving that agenda forward. In terms of cutting trees, deforestation, those are issues. And the tension that it's not just here in Grenada, but over the contention between and tensions between development and conservation and preservation. It is a very real issue. And how do we develop in a sustainable manner that protects and conserves appropriately? And those tensions we face here are faced in other islands in the region, other countries throughout the world. And that is where sustainable development comes into play. Okay. Is there a perfect answer to that? No, there isn't. But are we putting measures in place to try to find that balance, providing jobs, providing economic stimulation, providing opportunities for our population, especially our young men and women, development of our tourism sector, development of other sectors, development of our agricultural sector. These are all critical areas, how we live, where we live. And these aren't easy questions. But as said, measures are being put in place to try to find that right balance with all of the challenges that exist with that.
Another caller on the line. Good morning, caller. You're live.
Hi. Good morning, Joe.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Good morning to your followers and to your guest, Mr. Stiell. I agree with a lot of what the last caller said. Most of it, probably all of it. Senator Stiell, we hear a lot of lovely phrases, lovely sounding things, and a litany of projects funded from outside. And this government has been very good at following the money. But the contradiction between what you say out there, what this project is supposed to be doing, and what the government does as policy, and I would say the hypocrisy is so glaring. As the last caller said, we destroyed our mangroves and our wetlands and all those things. But two I want to specify. One of them has to do with the expected higher sea levels, rising level of the sea. Now, if we believe that the level of the sea is going to rise, would we go and build hotels in the sea, ignoring and going contrary to even the setbacks that was set up 40 years, 50 years ago? Look at the Silver Sands. Look at that one that halted down there again at the end of Granon's Beach. So we are saying one thing. If we expect the level of the sea to be rising, are you going to be going closer to the sea or going further away from the sea? We're doing just the opposite.
Okay.
We spoke of the landslides we expect with the hurricanes and so. We are laying bare all the hillsides in our country by some people who are called, ironically, environmental wardens. They destroy all our hillsides, they lay everything bare, and all you need is a good day of rain, and most of our hillsides are going to come tumbling down. So we're saying one thing. We're begging for money to do all kind of fantastic things, but we're doing in our practice totally different. How hypocritical of us. How serious are we about mitigating against climate change? We are not. We just want them.
Let's get the minister to get his response.
Okay. All right. So it's easy to add emotive language to this. It's easy to try to pick holes and speak of the contradictions or the hypocrisy. Following the money. We have to follow the money. Where are we going to get the hundreds of millions of dollars that's required to do the things that we need to do? What, put up taxes? Where? So following the money is exactly what we have to do. And if the caller is commending us for doing that, or is commenting on that, I will actually take that as a positive, because that's exactly what we need to be doing. We need to be accessing the resources that are available to us, because we do not have those hundreds of millions of dollars, $1.1 billion for our NDC, probably $1 billion for our National Adaptation Plan. Our Climate Smart Cities program, which looks at those critical interventions, $350 million, and more and more and more.
But Senator, so, I think we probably don't want to. But
if I could could I just finish this train? So we have to follow the money. In terms of the projects, we have projects that illustrate clearly what it is we're trying to do, whether it's a $125 million water project, whether it is work that's been done on the St. John's River, whether it's work that's going to be done on Molinaire, whether it is to climate smart hospitals, climate smart agriculture, projects that are valued at tens and tens of millions of dollars that are on the ground that are being rolled out that speak to the words.
But Senator, I understand the point that you're making, though. But I'm still going back to the question that the caller made, and it's the argument is because you make it sounds almost as though yes, it's just about the money in principle, but nothing in theory. The question is, sea levels are rising. Yes, you have to meet the international agencies, their requirements. But certainly, when you say that sea levels are rising, but every day you see the structures that keeps going up on the coastline, I think that is where some people the question of the contradiction comes in. Why aren't we then moving these hotels to other parts of the island? Why are we continue to build right on the coastline? If in fact we know that sea levels are rising, at some point in time, it's a matter of time that something may happen that would remove them from where they are anyway. I think that's where the question comes in, and I think that's really and truly is the real concern here.
Okay, so just closing on the opening point. The words are being matched by the money, are being matched by the projects, first of all. Secondly, so specific now to that point, I'm not aware of any hotels that are being built in the water as the caller spoke of. The two projects that he has mentioned, Silver Sands and Koana Bay, are sites of existing projects and existing footprints. The issue of a wall that was demolished because it exceeded the boundary mark has been addressed. So in terms of building in the sea, those are existing properties that have been built on, and you could not go further back from where they were. They're existing properties. The other project that he's probably referring to is at La Sagesse, and he's talking about the depletion of foliage on the hillside. That project is in construction. I'm yet to see any project, however environmentally sensitive, be constructed without the site in its initial stages, under its construction phase, looking a little bleak. The question is, what is it going to look like on completion? And there is a comprehensive program in terms of restoration of vegetation, enhancement of vegetation. The operator of that hotel it is environmentally credited as one of the leading hotel brands certified for sustainable development and its environmental credentials. So the question is, let us look at what that site looks like on completion. And if you want to point fingers at a site that is under construction to say that that is what the final product is going to look like is disingenuous and incorrect.
435-2041. We have a caller on the line. Good morning, caller. You're live.
Greetings. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Go ahead, please.
And your guests and everyone listening and viewing. Yes, Senator Stiell mentioned about, he used the word indigenous. Now, I want to say that I'm following on the basis of the first three callers, very powerful, in terms of hypocrisy and awkwardness, and yes, I will say the deceitfulness in which this climate change issue has been handling. But I'd like to put to the Minister a question in terms of the recent statements delivered by the Prime Minister at a special media conference weekend, moving away from the generation of electricity and focusing more with renewable energy. In particular, the investment in oil and gas. I'd like to ask the Minister, at what point in time was the government or is the government aware that this emphasis on oil and gas should not be given priority? Because in 2018 on the election campaign, that was prominent, it was top of the game. Now, is the government aware about the agreement of COP21, which took place sometime in 2015? So was it a matter of election gimmicking, hypocrisy, awkwardness, deceitfulness, ingenuousness in terms of knowing something, but presenting that thing to the people just to get votes? I find, again, it proves to how deceitful we are. And again, I'm asking a question, at what point in time the government was aware of the need to forget investment, because there will not be any institutional support for investment in oil and gas, but more attention will be given to renewable energy in light of climate change. Let us come straight to the people, although at this point in time, it seems to be already too late. But let us be honest with the people. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Senator? Go ahead. Yes, Senator?
Government has a responsibility to maximize assets that are available to it. We're a developing nation. If we have oil and gas resources that are commercially viable and it will bring benefit to the country, that has to be considered and explored. We have to balance that against what is happening environmentally. And is there a contradiction there? Yes, there is. But we are, as a developing nation, we have to put our best feet forward. So if there are revenues that could be derived from a natural resource that we have, and that could be done in in inverted commas, a sustainable way that brings direct benefit to the people and our economic development, as we've seen in Guyana, as we've seen in other parts of the world, it has to be taken into consideration. And I am not an oil and gas expert, but my understanding is the economics of exploration and production have changed over this period in terms of what is economically viable at this time and what isn't, and that has to be factored in. But in terms of trying to pursue both, in terms of the environmental considerations and exploration opportunities, we have to consider it. But we have to do that within the broader term of our development agenda. So there is a contradiction there, but that is a contradiction we have to work through. It's a contradiction Barbados has had to work through. It's a contradiction that Trinidad, Guyana is working through. But right now, the focus in terms of moving to renewable energy is one that can be made independently of that. There are economic and environmental benefits to pursuing a renewable energy agenda. So in terms of making a positive contribution in terms of the decommissioning of the existing diesel engines and the move towards energy security with renewables and the cost savings and the cost benefits that can be derived from that.
Thank you, Senator. It's about 2 minutes before the hour of 10 o'clock, and as such, we have to leave the conversation there. The conversation is going to continue, no doubt, that the Earth's climate is changing. Rising temperatures are already driving changes in climate around the globe, including precipitation patterns and everything else. And certainly here at home, we know government is we look to government and our policy leaders for guidance. And as such, there's so much that can come out of this conversation. What are the incentives? What can be done? Certainly, it's a conversation that we'll have to continue at a different time, though. I want to say thanks for your time, Senator. Wishing you all the best as you continue through the rest of the day. All the best to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Folks, it is not an easy conversation that you have. We have to look at it in all facets. Where do we go from here? Certainly, it's a conversation that each and every one of us as Grenadians need to get on board with. Climate change, what can we do in our individual capacities in terms of how we live, what we do? The conversation will always continue right here on To The Point. But for today, we leave it for now. All the best, Grenada. It is exactly 10 o'clock. We leave it for here. Until then, I'll be good. The good Lord's willing. I'll be back with you tomorrow for another edition of Good Morning Grenada, taking you through the morning time. Until then, JC loves you. So long. All the best, Grenada.